What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today I'm going to be breaking down the top offensive tackles of the 2025 NFL Draft. If you are new, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. There's a lot of new series I'll be coming up with in the next few weeks, so stay tuned for that because we're going to have a ton of content coming. The draft season never ends, but also we're going to be preparing for the NFL season. Very well might dip our toes a little bit into some fantasy as well, so very excited for that. Let's get right into this, starting out with how I grade the players. This is going to give you a very good idea of exactly what I think these players are going to be, because not only are they going to have a numerical grade out of 100, but they also have different tiers. So I'm trying to make this a little bit more representative of how I actually grade, to where, my grades actually still reflect the tiers, but I still want to understand or communicate to you guys exactly what roles I think these players are going to play day one. Now, I'm not someone who's a huge fan of projection. That's why I leave an it factor in there, because there's certain guys I could really see growing and developing. I tried to add that in there, but simply put, I'm not great at it because essentially I'd be pulling stuff out of my rear, and you guys deserve the honest truth. So I'm going to give you the honest truth. If these guys were going to the NFL, this is what they're going to be. So the guys who are tier 1 are going to be starters. Technically, I could have a tier above this, but it's been quite a while since I've seen a tackle that genuinely deserves to be like NFL superstar tier. And, I feel like just a role is going to be a lot simpler as a pure starter. Fringe starter, those are guys who probably could end up getting reps and potentially even start for some teams that really need it. But at the same time, they shouldn't be someone who's an every down starter just yet. And then there's guys who are developmental, and then there's guys who I just think should be pure backups over their career. Now, how I grade them on the numerical scale, overall, holistically, pass block, run block, a lot of that's based on efficiency of footwork, and everything works together to make basically a whole category. Are you good as a pass blocker? Are you good as a run blocker? There will be a series coming out this summer because somebody, I think it was RS Swimmer, ended up actually mentioning it in the live stream, because we do that every Friday, so feel free to check that out. But basically breaking down how we scout certain positions. And I think that that is a great idea. And it's going to be interesting to figure out how exactly to do that without obviously getting taken down by YouTube for, copyright reasons. But regardless, it's going to be really great to be able to show you how I scout these positions, especially on the Draft Bros show where Brosho and I are doing it. We're also going to be showing the difference between how we grade those positions, because we're very different with our styles, which is what makes it so fun, because it shows that there's just not one specific way to grade a player. There's a really interesting, nice blend of possibilities to get to a similar end. But anchor, do you hold your ground when guys are trying to push you back? Similar to an anchor on a ship, can you stay in place? Re-anchor is a part of this. It's something that I've developed as time went on. Like, usually I would look at initial anchor primarily, but re-anchors do exist. Sometimes guys can just get knocked off their base. If you can re-solidify yourself, that creates a much stronger opponent than someone who continues to get driven back. Mechanics works very much hand in hand with the pass block and run block efficiency, but do you have good footwork? Do you have good hand technique? Do you actually maintain position in the pocket? There's really unique intricacies that you can have in mechanics there. That's where you're going to start seeing some of the guys who are a little bit higher tier start getting some higher grades. Power, self-explanatory. Do you got pop in your hands? Are you able to deliver the power that you have? Some guys, you can see they have some pop in their hands, but it's not consistent, and it's just not overall really effective. So some guys just won't be able to score too well in that category. Mobility, again, pretty self-explanatory. Are you athletic? So overall, there you go. IQ, do you process the game? Are you able to select the right edge rusher to block? If there's a switch, do you handle it well? Are you anxious the whole time? Do you have patience? These are all factors that make IQ unique to itself. And then hands. Do you place the hands inside the chest plate? I no disrespect to the people who believe that this is a fine thing to do, but I vehemently disagree with the idea that tackles should be grabbing outside the shoulder pads. First off, if I'm grabbing you like this, I'm not going to have the same control as if I grab you here and I get to have my arms in a position to where my elbows are not flared out, and then it creates a much tighter and a much closer grip, and that just creates a lot more tension. Think about, since you're really going to be focusing primarily on your chest and your shoulders, Do you have better chest strength when you're right here or when you're out here on a fly? There's a lot more stress going into your shoulders versus where it's going right here. So there's a lot of little things in physics that we could talk about. Not really going to be key, but for me, I think that putting your hands on the outside of the shoulders is a very stupid thing to do. Great way to get holding calls as well at the next level. But already talked about it factor, dream fits. Don't take those too seriously. They're there just more for fun than anything. But yeah, I'm not going to be doing too many. Well, I'm not going to be doing any comps for offensive line because I think that's just kind of dumb. Comps are a good way for a reference, but I think that their role is a lot more beneficial to you to understand. But starting out with 13th, because yes, there's going to be 13 dudes, and yes, there's going to be plenty more. This is my option to basically test out the waters on a lot of these players that you're going to be seeing in these mock drafts, and then we're going to be diving into the deep dive of the positions. But Wyatt Millam, he's someone who is very inconsistent. One of the things I noted about his overall game is that his mistakes were unforgivable. He has very poor positioning in the pocket, and what that means is, how a pocket is supposed to basically be a representation of almost like a half oval. He would basically, rather than having his body angled as such, he would basically be like that. When you're angled like that and the quarterback is here, you're leaving a clear line to the quarterback, or you're making it easier for the edge rusher. And the goal of an offensive lineman is to make it as hard as possible to get to the quarterback, not make it easier for them. I thought that was a big issue with Wyatt. He lunges a lot, whiffs. I sometimes call it eating air. These guys just basically go forward. Dips his head in terms of initiating contact. Not a big fan of that. Someone who does like to grab on the outside of the shoulders as well. As the season went on, I thought that his game got a little bit better, but his mistakes were something that at a reactive position. So proactive positions like receivers, edge rushers, inconsistency is relatively okay because it's the few reps that usually make the bigger difference that count. When it's reactive positions like offensive line, corner, it's those few reps that you can't lose. You got to be way more consistent, in my opinion, because it's those few reps that really do make that difference. And unfortunately, Wyatt, the good reps were that few and far between, not the bad reps. So I don't know if he actually does get taken in the top 250, but it's a name that right now is on the consensus board within the top 100, and I'm not fully there for it. So I think that's one of the names that will be slipping as time goes on. Also got to see him get backed up into the quarterback. Ernest Green is next. This is a big hot take, but I think he's a guard. Just very, very, very slow. Yay, there's my first and only mistake of the video. Is the color on D is not updated, so that's okay. I mean, no one gives a shit whether a D is red or orange. But regardless, it's always a staple of my videos that I get one letter color-coded incorrectly. Anywho, he actually does a really good job as a guard. If you ever see the letters OL under position, you bet your ass they're going to be in my interior offensive line ranking. So he'll be coming back with a much better grade than this, by the way. But very unathletic overall. I saw him give up his outside shoulder to too many edge rushers. Not a fan of that. For me, I thought he felt way more comfortable when he had actually somebody next to him, like a tight end, or there's a specific rep that I put on Twitter where I actually post all 22 for free. So you get to go check it out, and also gives you a hint and some context to what I'm saying here. But there was actually, I believe it was a pulling tackle or a pulling guard that came over and essentially acted as a quasi tackle. And he looked so much more comfortable not having to worry about his boundary shoulder. And there's things like that to me that really indicate, that's how I determine whether I want a guy to be a guard or a tackle. Do you feel comfortable? Do you process well when there's somebody next to you? Or do you really need that much room to give yourself comfortability in your own skin? And some guys, like there's guys like Blake, it's not Blake Fisher, but Blake Miller, who we'll be talking about, that really aren't comfortable when there's someone next to them. They have a hard time knowing what to do. And guys like Ernest Green are far superior. I can guarantee you it's over 10 points difference between this and what his guard ranking is. So for those of y'all who do like Ernest Green, I think that there's a bigger role for him on the interior of the offensive line. I just do have a big issue with his overall game as a tackle. Now let's talk about Riley Mahlman. This dude's a beast. I love the flashes that he brings to the game, but I have this issue with a lot of Wisconsin offensive linemen. They love to dip their head on contact. Like, they go like this. And first off, when you dip your head, you're not looking at the player. Like, defenders make moves all the time. And unfortunately, Riley did end up on the receiving end of some of those moves as soon as he dips his head. He lunges as well, gets a little bit too toesy. I thought that he was a lot bigger than 313 pounds. He was listed 320 last year, maybe slimmed out just a little bit, but he didn't even look 320. He looked about 330 in terms of his overall movement. I do think he could kick into guard. I don't know if I'm actually going to fully grade him there because it's very tough for 6'7" dudes, or 6'6" even for that matter, guys to actually be very successful at that position. But primarily 6'7", 6'8", and beyond, especially with a shorter and shorter quarterback league, we are just talking about a lot of these playmakers being very successful. You don't really want the middle of the field to be essentially blocked out by a dude as tall as Riley Muman. But I thought that he was a little bit too toesy. That's, a lot of these players do have that. You need to sit back more on your heels. I do like his re-anchor ability, but the initial anchor, relatively suspect. A little bit too inconsistent for me. But overall, did like Riley Mullman's game in terms of being a developmental guy. It's just the mistakes and the fact that he is a weirdly light at a very tall position, and he plays with not enough athleticism to make up for that. Like, he plays like he is 330. That does give me some concern, but of course, going to someplace like Stoutland U might be the place to go. Now let's talk about Josh Simmons, my number 10 guy in this draft. This might irritate some Ohio State fans, but honestly, I was very, very surprised positively. He has actually some really good footwork, some very good hand technique, and he's a very good athlete and has some pop to his hands too. The problem is he gives up his shoulder too easily, and just the application of the game just is not there in terms of lunging and being too toesy. I do know I saw him get yanked a couple times, and overall his positioning on the pocket. These are things that can be fixed, especially if you have your footwork and your hand technique down. So he really does have the finer details, which is just so weird because it's very rare that you'll see someone with a good anchor with good mechanics not actually put pen to paper, so to speak. But Josh Simmons does have a ton of potential. That's why I gave him a little bit of it factor. Somebody who I have a lot of love for. I want him to be a developmental guy and not one of those dudes who I think is a practice squad / backup dude. I do want him to get his hands more on the inside. I do see him grabbing the outside of the shoulders way too often. A great match to see is, forgetting his first name, but Moore. He's the edge rusher I actually put in my top edge rusher video that just came out. That's a fun matchup to watch. Those guys went to town against each other because both of those are relatively solid technicians for the amount of respect they deserve. So I could totally see him actually really working out, and with an extra season under his belt, I could totally see him taking that step up to being a fringe starter for me. So I am a big fan of what Josh Simmons can do. Right now, not seeing the application of it because he really does get, unfortunately, poor hand positioning. But apart from where he puts his hands, I love everything else pretty much about his game. And I think that his mistakes are very tweakable, and he has a pretty bright future ahead of him if he ends up developing in that respect. Josh Conerly is next. This is a guy who, both of the Oregon tackles, we'll talk about them. Fun fact, they're going to be back-to-back. But both these guys are really, really solid players. I think that Josh Conerly and Johnny Cornelius are kind of flipped in the aspect that Josh is going to be a better athlete who potentially will have to be a guard because he lunges a little too much. He's a ball of anxiety. That's something I really didn't appreciate about him, is that he sometimes is a little bit late off the ball. Sometimes he just gotten in his own head, and you can sense an anxiety. When you're around someone who's tense, you can feel it. I could feel that with Josh Conerly. He did seem a little bit concerned in terms of his overall comfortability and trust in his own game. And that's why I gave him a 1- there. I also just thought that, again, hand placement. These guys just really need to learn. Put your hands on the inside of the chest plate. It's really not that difficult. And it also makes sure, because remember, aim small, miss small, you hit the target. Sometimes guys don't hit the target. But Josh Conerly, great athlete, has a ton of potential there for sure. But again, it's one of those dudes who really needs to learn to refine his game and be patient. Patience is so key. But he's going to be a developmental guy. I could totally see him getting some good reps there as a hybrid offensive guard offensive tackle. I don't really think he's going to be grading too much higher for me. I think that he's going to be primarily considered as a tackle. So he might not end up actually being in my offensive guard rankings, but TBD on that. Johnny Cornelius, spoiled it, is going to be next. He was my most recent study. He's a good player. I forget where he transferred from, but I know it was a much smaller school. And he overall, like, the weird thing about him is maybe it's the camera angle. He looks slow, but we're talking about guys like Zion Tupuloa-Fatui, who are very, very athletic players, not being able to beat him on his outside shoulder. Granted, I think that one of the issues I did have with him is the fact he gave up his outside shoulder a lot, but he almost was strong enough to hold off on being bended around. It was weird. Like, it seemed like it should have been much easier to get to the quarterback, and it just wasn't. But I don't know. What's up with Oregon? They didn't need to teach their guys to put their hands on the interior of the chest plate. That was something that really bothered me between both of those dudes. But Johnny also was noted as being backed up into the quarterback. A little bit inconsistent because he does have those reps where he can have a really solid re-anchor in there. But I think that's what kind of, his pass blocking was primarily poor because of that. I thought that he just needs to learn to hold the pocket a little bit better. But he surprisingly moves pretty well, and he is a mauler. I call these guys headhunters. Processed the game really well as well. He knows exactly the proper timing. Something I did love about him a lot was, like, when they're on the move as well, that's a great way to see into the mind of a player, see how tense they are, and see if they actually can know what to do when it's not scripted. He's somebody when, especially on the move, he's a pulling tackle as well. So this is especially the case because he has no idea who's going to be in the hole. He actually knows exactly who to block. That's a big plus for him. That's something I did like. He's very patient as well. So overall, really good player. I just didn't really see, like, it was weird. It felt like he was more effective than he should have been. Like, I don't know how much of that would translate. That's why I gave him a 1- there. But I did really like him as a pure tackle. Thought that he could actually last there. Now let's talk about Armand Membo. Yeah, this guy, very, very, very fun to watch. Now, I haven't seen somebody be almost useless in the run game as Armand, but I'm also blaming that a little bit on the system. They're having him block with his back because they were, like, running away from him. It was super weird. I don't understand that personally, but, Missouri's done a good job at being very competitive in games where no one really expects him to be competitive. I think his pass blocking IQ is phenomenal. I probably would have given him an A in IQ if his pass blocking IQ was in the run game. Just somebody who really did in space look very uncomfortable. But this also is somebody who has elite hand mechanics. We're talking about elite hand fighting here. Like, I almost noted that I think he might have been an edge rusher from before. I've got to go check out some more notes on him for the background on that, but he felt like an edge rusher or a defensive interior that was taught to be a hand technician, and his feet were god-awful. Like, there were just moments, there was a rep versus Mikael Williams where he was actually thrown to the ground. Mikael's not someone who is known for his power, right? He's someone who's much more known for his finesse. But when I watched the rep over and over again, I saw Armand's feet were way too close together, and on the move, his feet do not remain wide enough to create a good, solid stance. And that's why I saw him get planted on his butt a couple times. I think he needs to learn to maintain that solid footwork and that solid balance while on the move, and that's something that's a really big red flag for me. Otherwise, I would have put him probably at the Niners as my favorite fit for him, and they unfortunately did not really vibe with that idea because he doesn't play well on the move. But somebody who I do think should be kicking into guard because of the fact that, I think his lateral mobility for someone who's really athletic is dog water. And I think it is his footwork, but, simply put, he looked a lot more comfortable when there was, for example, a tight end next to him. I think he's going to be a guard transfer at 6'3". It's very possible that he should. He's very athletic, could be very Christian Hainsey. That might be my comp if he ends up being a full-time guard. I have him actually as a fringe starter as a guard because you have that hand-fighting technique. You don't have to worry about giving your outside shoulder. There's a lot to love with Armand Membo. It's just I think he should be a guard, and he's built for it. So that's great. But then we got Jonah SAA. Technically same exact grade, so you could call him tied 6. Who gives a shit? But we're talking about tackles here, and I think Jonah is a pure tackle. He's a good mover. He has some good pop to his hands, very inconsistent with it. One thing I do love about him is that he doesn't get driven back, and his re-anchor is very, very solid. Something I did see is that higher end hand technicians won a lot of the reps against him, and I thought that was his big issue, is the fact that, he doesn't time things right. I thought his feet kind of slowed up when he ended up firing his hands. A lot of these players have that issue, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about 20, 30, even down to 10 players at a certain position in each draft, there's not 10 spots open in the NFL for these guys to start, right? Like, there's not 10 of these dudes who are going to be perennial Pro Bowl level players. We have to be, unfortunately, a little bit more critical. And when I do micro-analyze the fact that your feet don't move when you fire your hands, like, that might be seeming like it's a bit over the top, because he has some really good traits. He's athletic and he can hold his ground. That's a great combination. It doesn't show you that he can last against top-tier edge rushers. And, versus Leatu Latu, for example, Latu feasted because he had much better timing than Jonah did. And Jonah had poor positioning on the pocket. He looked a little bit clueless in space. There's a lot to love about Jonah's game, but he needs so much development. This is a Dream Stoutland you type of guy, but he is somebody that I do think needs a lot of work before he can actually be a starter in the NFL. Now let's talk about Anthony Belton, who's just under being a fringe starter for me. This is just somebody who does not place his hands properly. A lot of times, I did see his hands fire a little bit too high. I thought his hands were on the shoulders way too often, and that's what led to him not having very effective pass blocking reps where he could control the player or run blocking down the field. I thought in short range, he did a phenomenal job. He's someone who can hold up to pretty much anything. I didn't see his anchor give up apart from like one time. And he's someone who has a lot of pop to his hands. So I do think he potentially could be kicking into guard, and I think he could potentially be a very high-end guard as well. There's a lot to love about his game. He has solid footwork. It's just versus faster edge rushers, I'm probably not going to be putting my money on him being the overly most successful guy at taking him and taking him to the town, take him to house, take him to the ground. But somebody who I do have a lot of respect for. I think he'll be a better pass blocker as a guard. Does lunge, unfortunately. I hate when players lunge. Just when you lunge, good edge rushers will take advantage of you, and that gives them an easy win to the quarterback. So Anthony Belton, though, really solid player, not getting enough love, and I think that he could be a guard transfer, but might very well hold up as a tackle. One of the guys who I decided to end up tossing in here that isn't really overly loved, and very happy I did so. Could totally see him being a very, very good offensive tackle in the NFL. Then we got Kelvin Banks, my first fringe starter. Kelvin Banks has been considered a top 32 guy. I would say top 20 because at that size, he's actually pretty damn solid. I feel like his one issue, very similarly to Anthony Belton, but much more egregious in his instance, he fires his hands really high. Like, talk about hands to the face type material. It's either out here or up here, and I did see a couple flags on it. So that did bother me for sure. That put him a little bit lower. And not to that an extreme degree, but that's why his hands grade is so low, is the fact that he just could not land his hands inside the chest plate. I do think that does, especially when holding your hands on the outside of the shoulders, tend to leave you a little bit less powerful in the run game. But overall, he is somebody who is very well balanced. Remember, if you guys are new to my series, maybe you don't understand, you might think B is pretty mediocre. It's not. C is adequate. So if you're above it, it's good. He's, overall very, very sound. He's a guy who I can totally see being worth a first round pick, right? Like, guys who I had graded as 72s, like Tyler Guyton, they ended up being first round picks, right? So, like, this is certainly within the realm of possibility. I wouldn't shame a team for taking him late first at all. And I think he needs maybe 1 year of development. Maybe he needs 1 year of coaching. Maybe it's just one off season. Maybe it's simply just getting his hands inside. That could end up solving all the problems. But there's a ton to love with Kelvin Banks. I think that with an extra year of experience under his belt, he very well might end up being the best tackle in this class. But, there's just a little bit of the finer details of the game in terms of where he puts his hands that I think could create the biggest difference. Now let's talk about Blake Miller, right tackle out of Clemson. This is somebody, he's the example of guys who I think should only be a tackle and I don't think could be a guard. Very uncomfortable when he actually had some blocking help, and that's kind of an issue. I did see him basically struggle finding who to block, especially down the field as well. But Blake Miller, he does actually have some nice quick feet. I want him to do a little bit more of the one arm reach out and, basically be able to support it with a second hand fire. What that basically means is you make contact with one hand just to make sure you're actually touching the guy, and then you're basically blocking him and supporting it with the other hand. It allows you not to whiff. And I saw a lot of whiffs on his blocks, especially when he's on the move, especially in the run game. A lot of times he would end up missing the guy he's supposed to block or getting himself out of position. And if he ended up having his hand on a guy, you also can then end up feeling the slight shift in their movement. I'm telling you, it's just a different feel. You can actually, it's almost cerebral. When you can just touch a player, you get to feel as soon as like the jersey starts to slip a different way, it's like an early warning system that they're changing direction. It's awesome. It's something that I do tend to look at. But I do think Blake Miller does end up doing a good job of putting his hands on the inside of the jersey. That's pretty damn awesome. And he has a ton of potential. I think he might be a first round pick, but I feel like I'm a little bit higher on him than most. He's a great player overall. Just, again, just some of the finer details I think he needs to work on. And I think that would end up helping his processing the game a lot more. He isn't the oldest guy in the world either. So he needs more experience, and that easily could boost his overall grade. Imagine if that run block boosted a couple points in his IQ. Instantly, he's competing for tackle number 1 in the class. But my tackle number 2 and my first starting grade of the draft is Will Campbell. I really do like Will Campbell a lot. My first eval of him, like my first game that I watched, was Alabama, and Dallas Turner took this dude to town. And some people were like, oh, he had like a good half versus Dallas Turner. Just like I said earlier, I don't give a crap if someone has a good half. If you have a bad half, that matters to me a hell of a lot more. And he had a bad half versus Dallas Turner. But the more I watch other players play Dallas Turner, the more I'm like, maybe it's just Dallas Turner. So obviously I had Dallas Turner as my number 4 player last year. So of course I'm going to be fanboying over him. But ended up watching a lot more tape on Will Campbell, especially versus first round quality players like Darius Robinson. And he actually did a pretty damn good job. I got to see him get out length quite a few times. And versus players of superior length, he has 33-inch arms. One of the only players who actually has measured arms in this class. But versus players of significant measured length, he does end up either being toesy or getting out length. And there was a rep where Darius Robinson perfectly timed it. Will Campbell leaned forward, and Darius kind of basically yanked him almost to the floor, but definitely got around him. It just, unfortunately, when you do have a little bit shorter arms, which 33 is fine. It's not good. It's fine. It's acceptable. It's a teaching moment for a lot of guys. It is a teaching moment, and he needs to be a little bit more patient when it comes to the reps after. I think he sometimes gets a little bit in his own head, but overall, very patient. He's very feisty. Again, B power and mobility is good, like very good. Talking about like the best of the best when they get a little bit higher than that, and I'm a tough cookie. I'd rather be a tough grader than someone who gives bullshit soft grades. It's why I ended up stopped being a sports writer for one of the sites that I was doing analysis for. They're just giving dudes like really high grades because they didn't want to get any flack or something. And it's like, that's just not my style. I'm okay being looked at as the douchebag, as an abrasive guy, if, that just means I can be completely honest. And I want to give respect to players where a B is a very good thing. It's something that we can tip our cap to. And Will Campbell is a very solid player. I think he might be better as a guard. He looks a little bit more comfortable when facing interior offensive line or interior defensive line builds. But, overall, I thought he did a phenomenal job. He's a really solid tackle, and I think he could easily start in the NFL. It's just maybe that length does get to him, and he does have some weird footwork, but it sometimes works for him. Somehow it does. It's interesting for sure. And then we got Emory Jones, the other LSU tackle. LSU had a good group of players last year. 2 first-round quality wide receivers, 2 first-round quality tackles, a first-round quality quarterback. Like, that's a pretty good squad to have. That's pretty key positions too. But Emory Jones was fantastic. Another player that I could see transitioning to the guard role. I do think that his positioning on the pocket sometimes could be improved, but someone who's very feisty, I think he just pops off the screen to you. And it's not that he needs to move to guard. I just think that his tenacity just works better as a mauler on the interior than as a pure tackle, because I think he gets a little overzealous. He gets really toesy. This is the most toesy tackle I've ever studied. This dude is straight up on his toes the whole time. And when you're leaning on your toes, it doesn't bode well sometimes versus players who are very strong and can take advantage of that. But it didn't end up being a big negative for Emory Jones. You got to remember, I'm very tough grader on my offensive tackles. I don't have very many categories for them to be able to get gimme points. So 75, that's why I haven't actually graded much higher. Like corners that have more gimme categories, because a lot of them are pretty damn good at their job. And it's the great ones that need a little more respect. I actually boost the tiers a little bit higher. So it's going to be very almost impossible to see tackles graded in the 80s for me. So this is a very, very, very respectable grade. I love his tenacity. I love everything about his game pretty much. I just want him to sit a little bit more on his heels. And I think that would solve a lot of his issues. Great player overall. Someone I have a lot of respect for, and somebody who I could totally see being a Pro Bowler in the NFL, if not an All-Pro, especially if he moves to guard. I think that'd be great. But I haven't really seen too many issues. The one thing I saw is I think he has 33.4-inch arms. Not confirmed. I just saw it on one page. And because I did see him get outlengthed by Chris Braswell once, and Chris Braswell had sub 33. So I was like, is this guy going to be a guard? But I do think that, if that is true, 33.5-inch arms is good enough to play tackle for sure. But if it is shorter than that, then we could easily talk about him making a very easy and very good transition to guard. Regardless, no pun intended, that's going to be the video. Thank you so much for watching, showing the love that you always do. Y'all know how much I love offensive tackles. So I'm glad that I get to share my passion with you. Thank you so much for watching. Love y'all. See you on the far side. Peace.